Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon. Today is episode 3 of the Mindshift podcast, where the goal is to keep thinking. Today, I want to keep thinking about the issues around the modern faith healing movement, specifically in America, specifically within Christianity. And to do that, I have a very special guest to help me work through this, and that is Thomas from Holy Koolaid. Thomas, how you doing today?
Great. I didn't realize it was very special, but I'll take it.
Very special indeed, because many people have heard me talk about you. I constantly highlight your playlist. You have many that I like, but the Nothing Fails Like Bible History is by far my favorite. That's one that actually I still watched when I was a believer and in the process of deconstructing. I remember it just blowing my mind. And so you've played, as I've told you, a very large part in my own deconstruction and eventual deconversion. And I'm very grateful and additionally grateful to have the chance to work with you today.
Well, I'm excited too. I've been following your work, not as closely as I would like, but I have seen quite a few of your videos and listened and watched a lot of your stuff and come a long way really fast. And I'm looking forward to seeing where your channel goes.
I appreciate that, man. In fact, I think we both hit milestones recently. I got to 50 and it looks like your channel just turned over to 300K. So congratulations to you as well. Yeah, that's awesome. Today I want to talk about faith healing, though, and I know this is near and dear to your heart as well. At least you have a playlist. You have about 10 episodes on it in the last year. You've really dug deep into both the psychology and the science of what is going on in the brain for the individual that is receiving faith healing, as well as the scam side of it and what is going on with these pastors or evangelists that are performing these so-called healings. So why should we be thinking? Why should we be talking about this? And why you're excited to have this conversation?
With anything that's potentially harmful, if you're not skeptical, you make yourself vulnerable to any charlatan or huckster that comes along, whether they want to take your money or whether they make a claim that potentially puts your health or even your life in at jeopardy. So when a faith healer comes along and tells you that they have this cure for some ailment that you have and you're desperate, and maybe it's something that modern medicine simply has treatments but doesn't have a cure for, and so maybe you have a prolonged condition, you have pain, or perhaps it's something that there is no cure for and you might have stage 4 cancer and you're looking at the end of your life. A lot of times people in those situations, they will turn to faith healers. They'll turn to, whether it's someone who is in a church setting, a Christian faith healer, it could be a Muslim faith healer, it could be a spiritual psychic person who believes in energy healing. When you turn to these alternative forms of medicine, then you're basically saying, I'm so desperate, I'm going to go to anything to try to be healed. But oftentimes it's in those exact moments that they will rob people of every last penny. They will basically pursue, if you're in a condition like this, you will pursue a cure. And oftentimes there's a tremendous cost in terms of the amount of time and energy, time away from your loved ones, time away from your family. You're given false hope. You're chasing these breadcrumbs, hoping for something, and oftentimes spending your last dollar. And sometimes it's the money that you could give to your family, to your kids, to your wife, to your loved ones, to make sure that they have some sort of stability after you've passed. And instead, they're giving all of this money. It's ending up in the coffers of charlatans and hucksters. So there's a tremendous cost at play. And in addition to that, even if you aren't on death row, even if you're not, about to breathe your last, oftentimes there's people who have conditions that are made worse by the faith healer. They'll go in and maybe they have. I saw one case where a man, he had broken his neck, but he wasn't paralyzed. He had a neck brace on and was basically told by the doctor to isolate it and keep it still, because if you did jerk it around a lot, it could potentially cause damage to the spine and you're subject to be paralyzed. And I watched footage of Morris Cirillo, who's a faith healer, come up and rip the neck brace off and jolt the man's neck around, telling him in the name of Jesus that he was healed. And the entire time, the man is just wincing in agony and pain. It's very clear that he's not healed. And there's a tremendous risk there of potentially causing long-term damage, causing something like permanent paralysis or potentially even death if people go along with these faith healers. The worst case scenarios often do result in death. There was a case in that same vein by that same faith healer, Morris Cirillo, when he was in London in the 1990s. There was a case where a woman who suffered from epilepsy came into one of his revivals. And he basically told her that she was cured. She stopped taking her seizure medication, and she had a seizure in the bathtub and died just a few weeks afterwards. So there is a tremendous cost. And if we're not careful, if we don't think critically, if we're not a little bit skeptical, if we don't approach this with some hesitation and rationality and think scientifically, then we do put ourselves at great risk.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. There's such a huge level for impact, whether it is financially or spiritually, emotionally, and of course, physically. My first question to you is, being a former missionary kid like myself, we grew up in this. I think we both saw this a lot. What was your first memory, if you can recall, of a faith healing, and how did it affect you?
So my first memory wasn't the typical evangelical setting that a lot of people in the States would be familiar with. So if you're in the US, you would maybe see a giant revival. There'd be some big larger than life pastor. You'd go to the front, you'd have them lay hands on you. You'd see this whole spectacle played out in front of you. But since I grew up overseas as a missionary, we didn't have that. I was in a Muslim country. Actually, I grew up in Azerbaijan, and it was right after the fall of the Soviet Union. So you couldn't go on a missionary visa. You couldn't just show up and have these giant revivals. There weren't people like Benny Hinn having these huge crusades that you'd go to with 100,000 people. Instead, my experience with faith healing was just within the missionary community. If, I had some sort of sickness, if I had a stomach ache or was throwing up or something, my parents would lay hands on me and pray over. So it was a very kind of personal, intimate setting. And even then, the earliest instances that I can think of, my parents still believed in medicine. They still believed in antibiotics and the importance of seeing a doctor and getting your vaccines and all of those. And for that, I'm very grateful that my parents, they weren't of the extreme ilk of someone like the Christian Scientist that will completely deny modern medicine and say that it's somehow going against faith by seeking out medicine. My parents saw it as the common sense thing that we're supposed to do, but then also turn to God in prayer and ask God for healing and for miracles in that regard. So pretty much all throughout my childhood, if there was ever anyone that was sick, we would take to our knees and pray. When my granddad had a heart attack in the 90s, I think around 95 or 96, and I just remember all of us just gathering in the living room and just praying and praying and praying for my granddad. And when he recovered, after he went to the hospital and I believe he had heart surgery or something, but after that happened, we saw it as a miracle that, God gave him 10 extra years of life without giving credit to the doctors or to the nurses or to modern medicine or any of that. It was just, we prayed and he's better. So there you have it.
And if he had passed, what would the story have been?
It's hard to say in this exact case, but I've seen enough situations where people have prayed for someone and they've passed away or they haven't been healed. And oftentimes, either in the case of my granddad, it would have just been, he's old and everyone's time comes sooner or later. And just it was God's time to call him home. And he lived a good, full life. And now, Jesus has another angel or something.
Right.
But oftentimes, if you have someone that is maybe living with a condition, perhaps they have, extreme scoliosis or they're paralyzed, they're quadriplegic, they're stuck in a wheelchair. It's a very visible condition. People will come up to them and pray over them all the time and tell them to rise and walk and stuff. And if they're not able to do so, then they are often blamed. They're told that you just don't have enough faith. If you really believed, then God would heal you. Or there's some sort of sin in your life, and until you confess and get right with God, then you're not going to be healed. And it really is incredibly psychologically damaging to people in those situations, because oftentimes they do believe. Oftentimes they do go to these faith healing services because they believe, and they're putting their faith into action, and they're really demonstrating how hard they believe. And they'll go to service after service after service and genuinely believe that they're going to be healed. And they're not, because these are conditions that they're not psychosomatic. They're not something that's can be affected by a placebo. You're not going to see someone who has an amputated limb suddenly have a limb grow out from a stub. And yet they're blamed for it because, there's some sort of sin in your life, or you need to give more to the church. You need to demonstrate your faith by planting a seed of faith, by giving to the church, by giving to these pastors who are flying around in private jets, because somehow if you give them more money, then your miracle will be able to manifest itself.
Yeah, no, you just covered so many of the issues that I am excited to get to. It is one of those, it's very similar to prayer. Obviously, many times people are praying for healing, but faith healing itself is its own unique phenomenon. And it is that win-win situation for the believer. Either it works and great, my faith is great, my God is real, look, confirmation bias everywhere, or it doesn't, in which case there's plenty of things like you mentioned to blame it on and escape that. And when you talked about limbs growing back, it reminded me that you are indeed in Stevens from Rationality Rules' studio today. He just had an amazing conversation, kind of a debate, if you will, with someone on limbs growing back. And so it reminded me, for many people that are confused and see you in the blue light, I just wanted to call that out and thank Stephen for letting us use his space today. But let's get into the meat of it a little bit here. Is faith healing biblical? And maybe what are some nuances you can draw out between these denominations and their interpretation of it?
See, whenever anyone asks, is something biblical, the easy answer is yes. The difficult answer is it depends. It depends. Sure. Every time that you read the Bible, you're negotiating with the text. You're bringing your interpretations to the text. You're reading it, and it might be one translation, it might be, one version, and you're taking all of the verses in a particular context based off of your experience that you bring to the table, your knowledge of the setting and the background and the historical context, and you're interpreting the text. And so I think from everything that I've seen in the Bible, it is very, very biblical. There are miracles all throughout the Bible, whether it's prophets like Elijah, raising someone from the dead, whether it's prophecies that are given, whether it's Jesus himself raising from the dead or walking around and healing lepers and blind men and deaf people and telling his disciples that they can go and do likewise, that they can go out and also perform these signs and wonders. And he's commissioning the disciples and sending them out. And then Paul going and doing the same. And then the long church history of people, the saints, claiming that they're performing all of these miracles. I would say that it's extremely Christian. It's foundational. Now, whether or not you say that everyone can heal, that everyone gets the gift of healing or the gifts of the Spirit, or that it's just a select few, or that it's just the apostles and that there's no more apostles, or that it's just certain people and that the last prophets and apostles and disciples have come and gone, and now we're living in the last days and we don't actually have the gifts of healing. Now, that's up for debate, but faith healing itself gets its roots, gets its origins in the Bible, at least for Christianity.
Sure. Yeah. What a thorough and excellent answer. We are constantly negotiating with the text to try to make the case. And there is some weird arbitrary line that is often tried to be drawn after the events in Acts. Well, do we still have this? Was this really for everyone? Was it just for those there? But you're right that church history alone suggests that at least it continued on for quite a while. So then where can a Christian draw the line? So, in America, it is mainly the fundamentalist that kind of get into this game, the charismatic side. I'm curious your thoughts on that from a denomination perspective, and if you can give any insight into why certain churches or groups of believers might navigate one way or the other.
So first off, I would say that while evangelical Protestant Christians may not be the largest denomination of Christians in the world, this is not just exclusive to them. Even if you look outside of Protestantism, you look at Catholicism, and I know some Protestants will say, well, Catholics aren't real Christians, which is kind of nonsense because they were like the original Christians, the Catholics and the Orthodox Church, both of them for hundreds of years, over 1,000 years before Protestantism even existed, that was Christianity. And they still very much have a tradition of faith healing and saints. And there's a site in France that I actually was in last fall called Lourdes, or Lourdes, if you're French. And it's basically this giant shrine, this huge church, this Catholic cathedral, where people flock to by the millions every single year, hoping for a healing, because there's this history of apparently the waters there have some sort of holy blessing, and that there was this lady that saw the Virgin Mary, and there's this whole story behind it.
Sure.
But regardless of the lore, they believe that they can go and be healed, and that they can go and have some sort of miracle happen to them. And so it's not just evangelical Christians, but even if it was just evangelical Christians, there are tens of millions of evangelical Christians. I don't know the exact numbers. I wouldn't be surprised if worldwide it's in the hundreds of millions.
Yeah.
And it's not just evangelicals as well, just because you might find someone who's more of they might be a Methodist, or they're kind of more relaxed Baptists. They're not the Pentecostals. They're not, dancing around and singing in tongues. They're not going to the snake handling churches or anything like that. But if you sit down and you ask them, can God perform miracles? they'll say yes. If you say, does God still perform miracles? Chances are they'll say yes. Mileage may vary, but there's a good, decent sized percentage of Christians that would say that he still works miracles. Now, if you ask them, can people work miracles through prayer or fasting, and can God use people? They'll most likely still say yes. Now, you can say, does it still happen today? It's like, can it? Yes. Does it? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact of the matter is that it's very difficult for Christians to be consistent and use the text of their Bibles consistently and completely deny the existence of miracles and the miraculous and faith healing and the supernatural.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The difference between what someone might privately believe or even, publicly confess. A lot of these churches that don't have the ceremonies that we would see of an altar call being called down to lay hands on and receive healing, within still their doctrinal or their mission statements will admit to these things being spiritual and being backed by, the Bible and being part of, God's powers. So it is an interesting dissection between those who believe it and those who might be more comfortable being in those positions, in those kinds of settings where it's more common. For me, I had to kind of grow out of it the opposite way. It was all that I knew. But like you, my parents, luckily, we were medical missionaries, and my mother was a nurse. And so in addition to all the evangelizing, we were doing real world help in Central America, helping people with dentistry and, basic antibiotics and things like this. So there's this level of modern science and the acceptability there, even performing vaccines for people in these countries. And then still, though, prayer night, healing night, which was usually like Wednesday night as kind of a subset, something totally different, was come and get healed spiritually. And those were the kinds of churches I was in where it would happen during, just a typical Sunday morning. The pastor would get a word, a message from God that someone in the third row, kind of like a cold reading in one of those medium shows, has a broken arm or something with their fingers maybe, and then someone latches onto that. Oh, they were in the fourth row, close enough. And so there were those settings. But then there was also the, hey, it's revival night, or so-and-so's coming into town, or, everyone's going to make the 3-hour trip down here, and we're trying to gather these churches up to go promote and support financially this event that was happening. And those are all such wildly different experiences. And I think today for our conversation, I do want to focus a little bit more on what people typically think of when they think of faith healing, which are these services, which are these, one pastor or a group of people working, performing very supposedly, physical and real miracles. Again, you never see anyone raised from the dead. You never see anyone that doesn't have eyes grow eyes. It's always something that can happen, within the span of a few minutes on stage. Let's start at the beginning of the process. Who are the kinds of people that are typically, and I want to be careful here, but I would use the word targeted by people that are performing faith healings?
This isn't speculative at all, because there are entire organizations that work for faith healers that run their marketing campaigns. And there is video footage I can send you, or you can go watch my channel or watch other videos that various news organizations have investigated, gone undercover, and talked with the marketing teams. They admit, they tell you who they're targeting. They tell you who they're going after. And it is lower educated, oftentimes low income neighborhoods. They're less likely to have health insurance. They're more likely to be desperate. They're more likely to be religious. They're more likely to be vulnerable. Oftentimes it is at-risk communities, minority communities, and it's places where religiosity is high, education is low, and rates of education on critical thinking and skepticism is extra low. And those are the areas that they target with their marketing, with their mail campaigns. Those are who they'll do address scraping and send out mass mailing campaigns to, because those are the people who they see as potentially gullible, but at the very least vulnerable and desperate. And so if they can target these communities and tell them, hey, you're having difficulty paying rent, well, it's time for a financial miracle. You just need to plant a seed of faith and God is going to bless you tenfold. Oh, you're struggling with having arthritis or cancer, or you have horrific asthma or seizures or whatever the case may be. Well, Instead of having to pay X number of dollars for your insulin medication for your diabetes, just come in and we're going to pray over you and have you healed. But first, make sure that you donate to the kingdom so that God knows that you're serious about this. You plant that seed of faith and then you're going to be healed. And so if they're targeting people who may not have a tremendous amount of money, but then they tell them that if you max out your credit cards, if you give even money that you don't have, God will bless you tenfold. These people are more likely to believe it. And if they're doing it at scale to tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people that will show up to these revival campaigns, then all of that money adds up. And before you know it, these faith healers have millions of dollars. But that's who they're going after.
This is why I'm really glad to be having the conversation with you, because as aware as I am about the issues and the harm, I simply have not done the level of due diligence that you have to understand what's going on behind the scenes. And I shouldn't be surprised. I'm really not surprised at all that there is that level of forethought from these ministries, so to speak.
Oh, it's calculated. It is heavily calculated. And I think that the most shocking thing to me that I've discovered in the last couple of years of researching this is just how deliberate, calculated, and malicious it is. I think that initially I was willing to give people more of a benefit of the doubt. There was some plausible deniability. I wasn't sure if they were deliberately scamming, deliberate con artists. And while I think that there are some who genuinely believe it, especially on the lower down levels of the ladder, almost without exception, you start going through these televangelists and these mega pastors that have millions of followers that are flying in private jets that have these massive, massive faith healing revival services. They're all pulling the same scams. They're all pulling the same stunts. They share the same accountants. They share the same lawyers. They have the same offshore bank accounts. Some of them literally own property right next to each other on the same block in like the most expensive real estate in the US, in Florida and California. They'll endorse each other publicly. They'll go on each other's TV shows. They'll pull the same stunts, whether it's these scams like the leg extension scam, which I've covered in a video, whether it's having earpieces and doing hot readings where they'll gather information from the audience ahead of time and then like have it read off to them in the earpiece, and they act like they're getting this direct information from God. That's this divine word of knowledge. All of these stunts that they're pulling. And so as I see this going on, it's like when you use the word calculated or deliberate, I was not aware when I first got into this just how much that was the case. And now as I start realizing how widespread it is, and I start discovering hundreds of them, and this isn't just some atheist takedown. The biggest watchdog organization of people like this is actually called the Trinity Foundation, and it's run by Christians. It's a Christian charity for homeless people who started to take people in off the streets. And they started realizing that people were coming to them consistently who had given their last pennies away to these faith healers. They gave money just in desperation, hoping that God would bless them. And then they weren't able to make rent. They ended up on the street. They went to these faith healers asking for some sort of help, and they were turned away, told, like, this isn't a charity, get lost. And so that really boiled the blood of the founders of the Trinity Foundation, this Christian charity. And so they started looking into and investigating these faith healers, going undercover, going behind the scenes, doing research, and then using that basically to then provide that information to the press and to the media and to expose a lot of this stuff. They've done dozens and dozens of exposés over the years. A lot of it's only on VHS tapes, and I'm actually working on digitizing a lot of that footage because it's difficult to find online at the moment. But there is some. If you just go on YouTube and you look up exposés of faith healers, you'll probably see the Trinity Foundation. Last time that I talked with them, I was up with them in Dallas at the end of last year, and they're tracking 60 private jets of faith healers.
Wow.
Those are just the ones that are wealthy enough at the top,
right,
that can afford a multi-million-dollar personal airplane. And those are just the ones that they know about. While I was there, I asked them if they knew of a particular faith healer who's relatively new to the game who has 2 of his own private jets. And they hadn't even heard of this guy. Like, that's how widespread this is. That gives you an idea of like how massive this is. There are hundreds of people involved that are all pulling the same type of scheme. And that's just the faith healers. Then underneath them, there's an entire team of people that are all coming together. Now, is every single person on every rung of the ladder malicious and involved and deliberate in scamming people? Like, I'm not going to go that far. I think that there are a lot of people who go in with good intentions. Even some of the faith healers, I genuinely believe in God and the afterlife and heaven and the Bible and all of this stuff, but they know that what they're doing is dishonest. They know that the things that they're doing are causing harm. But I think in many of their eyes, but we're bringing people to the kingdom. We're saving souls. Who cares if their body dies, if their soul is saved? And if we are able to reach millions of people and we get to kind of prosper and have these $1 million condos and have these expensive vacations, then, well, I mean, what's the harm in terms of the total sum of things? So they'll make this sort of utilitarian ends justifies the means argument to justify these horrific things.
That's wild. I probably knew this, right? But like you, I was probably even with all the horrendous understanding I have of the manipulation that can occur in these kinds of events. And maybe it's part of my indoctrination still peeking through. You want to give that benefit of the doubt. You want to say, maybe they think like they have to go about it this way, but yes, it's ultimately going to result in this. But yes, obviously at those high levels, it is nothing but pure manipulation and at least purposeful targeting. And getting back to that, that's what's so fascinating. I think a lot of people in our generation understand how targeting works in general. We're the ad generation. We get an ad of something we just talked about and we're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I was just talking about that. Of course, Facebook heard me. But when you are an elderly person who gets a mailer and it says something specific to your actual condition, and they're just not aware of the data companies that are out there that are selling this kind of information, and you have whatever lung condition, and it's saying, hey, if you have a lung condition, we know that you do come and get healed at this and this event. That feels to them like God speaking to them. And so it isn't just, they're getting the right people in front of them. They're getting the right people in front of them under the right intention, already upping that level and priming them for what's going to happen, that it's already starting with miracles like, he knew me, he knew about my issue. And I think that it all works together to create this horrendous tipping point where the harm starts to come in.
I want to respond real quick to that point that you made, because this targeting, a lot of people don't realize just how deliberately over the top and deceptive it is. Because going back to even just 20 years, 30 years ago, before the advent of modern technology, a lot of faith healers would have, when people came to the services, they would collect information from them for the mailing list for their magazine that they would send out. And they would say, send us your prayer requests. Just write to us. Let us know what you need, prayed for. And people would send them, either they'd fill it out there at the service or they'd write and send it in to them, because of a TV ad or something, and say, this is my name, this is my address, this is my ailment or condition. And a little bit later, sure enough, they'd get this letter that seems highly personalized. A great example, Robert Tilton, there's some great exposés on him where he would send out these personalized letters that the person would get, and it just seems so personal to them. It says, Dear Jane Smith, God had me up all night. I couldn't sleep. I just had your name. It was on my heart. And I know that God is going to heal you of your arthritis. I've never met you before, but just God placed me on your heart to pray over you. And so I'm writing you today to let you know that I'm standing with you in the kingdom. I'm praying for you. God wants, you to join with me as his prophet to work towards your healing. And, and I've included in this packet, this prayer cloth for you to kneel down on and send it back to me. And if you want to join with me in my ministry, then send me back this letter to let me know that you're on board and that you want a healing. And as soon as they start interacting, then they start sending requests for money and planting a seed and all of this stuff. But it's those letters, they were all crafted by a marketing organization there was one in particular. There was a guy named Gene Ewing that organized this whole marketing campaign, first with Oral Roberts. And then, he himself was a faith healer first. And then he worked with Oral Roberts. He worked with Don Stewart. He worked with Robert Tilton. He worked with just at least a half a dozen or more other faith healers. And he was just one of multiple similar marketing schemes that would do this type of stuff to make it seem heavily personalized. And it's just a marketing room. It's these printouts that have this signature that looks like it's handwritten by Robert Tilton. It's just a printout.
It's so sad.
They're sending it to vulnerable people, acting like it's this personalized deer thing that the faith healer had them on their heart. And in actuality, the faith healer has absolutely no idea who the person is.
Right.
When the person sends checks in, the faith healer doesn't even see the prayer requests or touch them or pray over them. They literally get this, and this was all revealed in like a legal deposition with Robert Tilton. His case actually went to court. Company that processes all of their mail just takes out the checks, throws the rest away, and sends the checks off to the bank to be cashed.
It's so crazy. And it just reminded me, I actually haven't thought about it. It's not related specifically to faith healing, but it is to televangelism. The host, John Oliver, did some big special on televangelists where he wrote into one and he shows every letter that comes after. It was a series of like 19 letters, each with like upping your level of giving. You get something each time, like a different prayer tassel, a different color means X. And it is this system that, again, people that are whether they're older or sicker or vulnerable or financially dependent, it works so well on them, unfortunately. And I would hope that via the internet and some of the generations that are a little more astute with this kind of thing being able to go on, that we would see a decline. And I'm probably jumping to the end, but I'm curious, in your research, has the internet helped or hurt these kinds of predators?
So as I was kind of teasing at before, that the mailings and the personalization and stuff is not new.
Right.
But the technology, the high-tech nature of it now has put a whole new set of tools at their disposal. So now they can run bulk Facebook ads and Instagram ads targeting people that follow certain pages, that like certain things, that, if you're in a demographic where you're, over the age of 60 and you like certain pages about Christianity or the Bible or religion, or certain evangelical pages, you're following Benny Hinn, you're following someone else, and I'm another faith healer that's new to the game, I'm just going to run a Facebook ad that targets that demographic, that targets those people, says that I'm coming to town, that I'm coming to the area. And you can get very specific with ads. You can say like, all right, everyone that's within a certain mile radius of this city, I can run an ad in that specific region, and then have people basically who are potentially vulnerable or potentially already kind of nibbling at the bait to then see this, and they're just blasting that out by the millions, rather than even having to write and print out a letter and send it in the mail.
You're right. It has upped the reach and the ability for those that want to misuse it, for sure. I do have some naive positivity that there will be enough exposure via the internet, just like everything else. I mean, I think the deconstruction and deconversion movement in general have been more helped than harmed, of course, by the internet. But it's sad to see these things hold on, because there will always be people in need. There will always be people that are less educated. There will always be people that just simply don't have the awareness, and they are the ones that will continue to be preyed on.
So I partially agree.
Okay.
With that, because on the one hand, religiosity in the States has been declining steadily over the last 20 years. And that's a uncontroversial fact. But evangelicalism in the US has actually increased. So while you've seen a decline in Catholicism or in kind of these run-of-the-mill, like middle-of-the-road Christians, and atheism and agnosticism have been on the incline, the extreme religious evangelicals have been on the rise.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the nature of Christians in the States. They realize that they're losing on the numbers front. And so whether Christianity in the US is in its death throes, or whether it's just losing some of its power and influence, they're desperate. And so desperate people do more extreme things. And so they're trying to shift to be more appealing to the youth. And one of the ways that they do that is by having that energy, having that excitement, being super high tech, having TV shows and having, church services with all these lights and drum sets and bands with electric guitars. And they make it more exciting and more interesting. But the ones who are able to afford to do that stuff are these televangelists and faith healers who are raking in millions, sometimes hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And the ones who have a conscience, the ones who are doing it just because they care about the ministry. Like my aunt was a Presbyterian pastor. She had a tiny church of maybe 150 people. It was never about the money for her. If she had been a psychopath who didn't have a conscience and only cared about the money, she probably could have grown that church to be a massive money-making cow to milk.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like there is a natural selection for psychopaths within this industry.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. That, even with the decline in general, the death throes are causing this, it's going to get worse before it gets better kind of thing, until those numbers really even out. I've seen different projections. We're going to get to that tipping point of more nons than any individual. What year is that? 2074 or something like that?
I doubt it's going to take that long, to be honest,
Yeah?
because things like this usually become more like exponential. So if there's 20% of the population that doesn't believe now, and they're all having conversations and they're all spreading good information and debunking stuff, then the Overton window of what is acceptable to, it used to not be acceptable to even talk about Christianity in a negative way or to criticize it. And then you had these exposés like the Boston Globe revealing the kinds of abuse that the Catholic Church was doing to kids. And all of a sudden that shifted the Overton window. So all of a sudden people were able to talk about it openly, to talk publicly, and to criticize priests and pastors. And they weren't seen as just being good people because they're religious. And 9/11 also shifted that a lot. The books by the Four Horsemen, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, and Christopher Hitchens, and all of the debates that they did, and now the rise of YouTube atheism. So it kind of snowballs. And now you're seeing these TikTok influencers and Instagrammers that are talking about it. And it's so much easier. You just pick up your phone and you talk or respond to some video, and you hit post and it goes out and reaches 100,000 people. So we're seeing that on the increase, but then we're also seeing people that are getting into the Christian sphere and are getting into apologetics, and they still have massive funding. They have these multi-billion-dollar organizations. They have these churches that are worth millions that are getting behind them, that have production teams and that have marketing teams and have the budget to support all of this. And so you're seeing a lot of content creators push out these ideas, even if they are easy to debunk and to refute and correct. You're still seeing them have bigger platforms and more reach, and there's more of them out there. And so I think because of that, we have our work cut out for us. And this isn't just going to happen on its own. It's not a guaranteed thing. It's not something that you can just kind of sit back and it's just going to all work itself out. Like literally me and you and every person watching this needs to be active in pushing back against misinformation wherever you see it, whether it's online in a comment section or whether it's putting out videos or responding to TikToks or whatever you're good at, whichever area you feel comfortable. It could just be having a conversation with a family member over a cup of coffee. If we're not active in pushing back against misinformation, then it will spread. That's the only way to inoculate society against pseudoscience, pseudo-history, pseudo-archaeology, misinformation of all stripes.
Man, I love it. I love your zeal. It is like getting to just have your channel come to life on this interview, which I'm very grateful for, because I don't think you or I or most people that do this are just doing it for fun or because it's something that we find interesting. I find your religion very interesting and biblical history and comparative religion, all of that. But I wouldn't care enough to hop on and make 3 videos a week unless it was to help hopefully reduce harm. And I think that awareness is step 1, which is why I'm so glad to have you on. So thank you for your knowledge here. This is really enlightening and very exciting for me to hear straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, on someone who's done so much research on these topics. The other thing that I want to keep in mind as we have this conversation is there is the big revival televangelist side of it, but it does boil and trickle down all the way to these small little churches and even still, the newer home churches that are kind of coming back in vogue and things like this. And I think that those being out of sight often does make them out of mind, plus the numbers just aren't there. But I would almost argue that the harm could be definitely the same, if not worse, because that is someone's actual community. Those are the people that are actually involved in their lives, and they go and they disappoint by not being healed because they can't get themselves to play the game, or they're not responding to the right stimuli, they're not the right kind of neurochemistry to do so, or something actually does happen. The harm gets worse, or a grandparent dies who was in one of this, and then you get the rifts and the division and the rest of the judgment and shame that can follow. I want to share one quick personal story. I've only shared one time, and I'm going to do it as kind of a precursor to a few questions for you. It wasn't a big revival. It wasn't anything. I was 10, 11, 12 years old, somewhere around that. My mother had been invited down to Texas to do a speaking engagement at a few churches. She was a missions director and had a lot of time in the field. And so, we did that kind of touring thing often. And we were at this little tiny church, 100, 150 people. And on the car ride down, and I'll speed this up very quickly, my sister and I were fighting in the van. I exaggerated quite a bit that I had hurt my wrist trying to get her in a bit of trouble. And kind of held on to that lie the rest of the night. And then sure enough, we're in church and this pastor's up in front of this small congregation and he's doing his thing and he gets a word from the Lord that someone in the audience has a wrist that they need healing from. And looking back, I'm quite sure that my mother had a conversation. They went to dinner before and she probably mentioned the kids fighting in the car and my wrist getting hurt. And that was the first time that I had seen, and I can't prove it, but that was the first time where I was like, there might be like a level of manipulation going on at these kinds of services. And again, this is just one guy. He doesn't make a big paycheck off of this. This is his little home church, but he felt the need with this information, if my theory is correct, to prey on that. Whether it was simply for the fact of getting his congregants to believe that he's hearing from the Lord more, that there's something special happening, or, these things happen all the time, I think is my point. And it doesn't have to be a revival. It doesn't have to be someone that's a millionaire. It doesn't have to be caused by greed. So I'm curious, I definitely want to focus, on the majors, but what is your opinion of the average day pastor, leader, youth group leader, Christian mentor, Bible study leader that believes and tries to do these things? Is there some manipulation going on there? Is it their honest belief? Like, what do you see that as?
It's a mixed bag. Once you start getting into your kind of smaller everyday church who's not doing this operating at scale, calculated, you do end up with people who, and I know quite a few of them, who genuinely, sincerely believe. And they might genuinely, sincerely believe because they went to a faith healing revival of someone like Benny Hinn and they saw from a distance something that they couldn't explain. And so therefore you can't explain it, therefore God. And which is a whole nother thing we can get into, but it's fallacious reasoning. Oftentimes people see things and they're like, oh, wow, if they did this, if I just do the same thing in the same type of scenario, maybe I'll have the same results. And so while someone like Benny Hinn will have everything about the music calculated to create this scenario where everyone is on the edge of their seats, they're seeing all these videos on the screen of the faith healer and the great miracles that they've done. And then you've got this slow kind of rising of the music and this grand crescendo. And then right as they're singing How Great Thou Art, Benny Hinn walks on stage before everyone. And it's like, oh, it's not about me. It's to God give the glory. But here's this larger than life man on a stage that everyone is facing and singing to How Great Thou Art. And then all of a sudden he's, coming down and he's, people are just like full of adrenaline. And he's summoning them up to come onto the stage and he's laying his hands on them and shouting the power of God. And the person's like falling over into the hands of the catchers. And like, you can recreate this anywhere. If you just, you follow that simple, formula, you follow the steps, you check the boxes, you play the right music, you create the right environment, people are going to have an adrenaline rush. They're going to have a placebo effect. They're going to have stress and, all this cortisol in their system. They're, coming up on stage. They're nervous. They're anxious. They're jittery. Adrenaline is a natural painkiller, so they might feel their pain kind of dissipate. They want to be healed. They're told that you have to believe it, so they fake it till they make it. They'll go along with it. They'll go along with anything. They don't want to call out or embarrass the pastor. They don't want to potentially cause other people to doubt their faith. So a lot of people, even in these settings, who genuinely believe it, the pastors might genuinely believe it in these, small churches, and they'll do the same thing because they're like, I saw Benny Hinn do it, I can do it too. And they do it, and oftentimes they do get some kind of a reaction from people. Oftentimes they do have someone have, pain that goes away. And maybe the pain goes away right up until the moment that the person walks out of the church service and they go back to their normal lives and the adrenaline dies down and all of a sudden they realize that they weren't healed at all. But the pastor will ask them, how's the pain now? And they say, oh, I don't feel anything. Hallelujah, a miracle.
It's a good point. Like, I think, who was it? I think Dan Barker in his book, Godless, he came from this kind of a background to this evangelical. And I think he was a worship leader at one point in his church. And he talks about how, it's kind of like everyone's playing their part, even though they believe it. So like the pastor is going to say this, and that means, he needs to do this on the keyboard. And it's having an effect where that person who's in the front row, who was, in your video, you already point out, or it's pointed out in that video, the people that are typically in the front row are the ones that are going to be the easiest to, the most influential. And we'll talk about that in a second. But those people stand up, and because they're eager, and that makes the people in the back be like, maybe I should. And you have this whole thing that happens, and it's kind of just based off cues. And all the dominoes are falling in place, even if nothing is actually happening, but it still leads to the next person having the response that leads to X. And I remember that part from his book and being able to relate to that, because even with all my Christian belief, there were times where I was like, well, I don't know, did that person's knee really feel all the way better? Or did it get slightly better? Like, shouldn't there have been atrophy if they hadn't walked in so long? But maybe that's the miracle, right? And so you're trying to balance this, like, you want to believe in it, but you also want to leave room for, it could be the devil, or maybe this person didn't have enough faith. All of the excuses were taught ahead of time. So maybe where I'd like to take it next with you is just, let's dive into it. You're there, whether it's a home church or a huge revival. The pastor calls, it's time to do faith healings. What is happening in the heart of someone or the mind of someone that has some kind of illness or sickness and wants to be healed? Where does it start there psychologically?
So it starts long before the person even sets foot in the arena. Usually the person is desperate. They see this glimmer of hope from this faith healer they hear stories about. He's going around healing people. They might see footage of him online. They might see something, someone shares a video or tells a story or shares something about the person. So they're going into it already primed to believe, already looking for and expecting something. And then they'll see, I went to a faith healing service a couple of years ago that Rodney Howard-Browne was holding in Dallas. And before he even gets up on stage, you're seeing these videos on the projector of 10,000 people saved and this many people healed of their diseases and revivals in this many countries, and you're seeing him just this larger than life man in front of these crowds of people, these throngs of just thousands and thousands of people. And so you're already going into it primed. It's not just this, you come up to someone on the street and say, in the name of Jesus, you're healed, and the person's healed. Like there's so much psychological prep work that is involved. And then as you're sitting there in the service, the music is building this heightened emotional state. People are closing their eyes. They're in this highly meditative state. The music is largely hypnotic. It's creating this environment where you're swaying, maybe you're dancing, you're chanting, people are speaking in tongues. And so and to speak in tongues, you kind of have to shut the brain off in order to engage in glossolalia. You just kind of like flow. You go into this flow state where you just say kind of the first gibberish that comes into your mind. So it's this perfect scenario where they're just getting people to be ready to go along with anything. And it's similar to the crowd work that you'll see at a stage hypnosis event, where they'll kind of select people from the crowds, like the people in the crowd that look like they're the most susceptible, that look like they're the most vulnerable. If someone is already like swaying and speaking in tongues and chanting and shaking, then those are the people that they're going to approach first with the microphone or have up on stage. Also, a lot of these services, especially the larger ones where it's heavily crafted and orchestrated, they'll select who they bring up on stage. So they'll have spotters in the audience that basically will tell people if they can and can't come on stage. So sometimes people will come forward, they have a condition that is incurable, maybe they're completely paralyzed in a wheelchair, and they'll tell them, we just want people on stage who have already had an experience, already experienced a miracle. Once they've already had that miracle, then they'll come on stage to share their testimony. We don't want someone who isn't cured yet. And yet, if there's someone that has a condition that could easily be passed off as a miracle healing because they have some placebo effect or they have some on-stage, diminishing of pain or something, someone like they have arthritis and all of a sudden you're able to take their cane and throw the cane off to the side, and yet they're still able to walk and hobble across the stage. Oh my God, a miracle.
Right.
You ask them how their pain is. Their pain, of course, it's diminished in that kind of a state. I mean, I can't tell you how many just hundreds of hours of footage I've sifted through. But if you go and you watch like there's a faith healer named Billy Burke that works with the Kenneth Copeland Foundation's ministry, and he does a lot of faith healing stuff. And they'll do these revivals where he'll have like a 3-hour service, and he's praying over different people and going from one person to the next. And he doesn't make any claims that every single person is going to be healed. A lot of times they'll actually blame people who don't get healed by saying things like, you just need to keep trusting God for your healing. It'll come.
Yeah.
Or you just, you need to have faith, or maybe there's some sin in your life, or whatever the case may be. That he'll go around and work the crowd, and he's seeing who he can use, who he can call up. And if he prays over someone and asks, how's the pain now? That's always that's the biggest question that they ask in those situations, if the person says, and they do say sometimes, like, well, the pain is still there, then they'll say, well, let's pray over it again. And they gather people around, they get more amped up and more, adrenaline, more excited, and yell over the person and have them fall back into the arms of the person catching them. When they follow up, oftentimes there is extra pressure for the person either to say, well, it's better, or it's a bit better. It's not quite all the way there. Well, I pray in the name of Jesus that it gets all the way better, and they'll pray over them, and then they'll take the mic away and just work the crowd and move over to another section. People don't realize what they've just done. They don't realize that it is a failure. It's an absolute failure, and this person was not susceptible to faith healing. The person went into it open-minded, but they're not going to lie. They're an honest person, and sometimes people's brain chemistry is just wired in such a way that you don't experience a placebo like that. You don't get that kind of adrenaline rush. And so they'll basically shift away from those people and move on to the next person.
Man, that's so sad. Going back to what we said earlier, the win-win. I just did a video on Tuesday about just a really small, not even faith healing. It was about baptism in the Holy Spirit. And this pastor of this small church, well, now I guess it's pretty big, had tried to do a baptism of the Holy Spirit on these two toddlers, both of them 3-year-old, one a boy, one a girl. The girl froze, with her hand out. And of course, that is evidence of the Holy Spirit coming upon her, right? The boy fell to the floor after two pastors continued to pass him back and forth and work him down there. And of course, that was evidence of the Holy Spirit. Neither one of them, of course, spoke in tongues. They're 3. But you can spin it. So I guess, the confirmation bias of the crowd going into what they're seeing, and then the pastors being able to negotiate with, again, demons, lack of belief, healing, but not yet, in the future, dismissing this person in general, or trying to work their story. It's like nothing could go wrong. And I think that's one of the things that went off in the back of my head a lot early on when I would see this, is like, well, this can't be fake. Look at it all. Like, not all of these people can be actors. This can't all be plants. Because, I had heard of the people that had the earpieces, and it's like, okay, so that church was manipulative, but this can't all be fake all the time for everyone.
Well, I would agree with you that not all are. And when I made the statement towards the beginning where I said that I think most of the large ones genuinely know what they're doing, and they do it anyways. Some of them, I think, even of the biggest ones, even of these mega pastors, I think some of them know that what they're doing is dishonest. But there was a leak. I forget which pastor it was, but there was a pastor that his son exposed him for doing research on people ahead of time and then passing it off as divine knowledge from God. And he leaked all these texts and stuff, and he showed that his dad was doing this stuff, and he's like, this is really messed up. And his dad's reasoning, his excuse was, well, yes, I know that but I'm kind of twisting the truth a little bit, but it's sort of the hamburger helper, if you will, that I kind of add on top to sprinkle in to get souls into the kingdom.
Yep. And so there's that ends justifying the means. And I think that's almost grosser than the people who are just like, I don't believe this. I want to make a quick buck. And these people are easy targets. Like, that's horrendous. But to work into your head to hurt people in this one life that you and I would know is all they're going to get, under this idea of who cares, it's so temporary, I'm doing them a favor. I don't know. That seems almost more disgusting to me. And it's sad because those people can be good people, truly believing, truly desiring and thinking that the highest good is a soul in heaven, which of course it would be if heaven were real, because infinity compared to 80 years is nothing. But that kind of justification goes a long way into a lot of terrible things, this included.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the smaller churches that they genuinely believe it, and they're going along. And I've been to plenty of these churches where the people are going along with it. And for whatever reason, whether it's a placebo effect, or whether it's, caught up in the moment or adrenaline rush, or whether they pray over people every single time and nothing ever happens, but they just say, you just got to keep believing, and we know that it's real. And so they keep praying for miracles every time and just hoping that one day that they get one. I think that a lot of these pastors in these small churches are authentic. I think they're real. I think they're genuine. Doesn't mean that they're not causing harm. It doesn't mean that they're not perpetuating something that's not true. But to add that to your point that you said, well, how could they all be lying? How could they all be actors or fake? I don't think that they are. I think most of the people who attend these services are real, genuine, honest people that are desperate and looking for a miracle. And some of them come away thinking that they've been healed.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of psychosomatic conditions that can improve with belief. And it could be you took a sugar pill. It could be that you took some placebo medication. It could be that someone claiming that they had psychic abilities, like waved their hands over you and did some sort of Reiki nonsense.
Yeah.
And this, like, placebos do have an effect. The mind can have a powerful effect on your health and your conditions and stuff. That doesn't mean that there is a supernatural entity and that there's some sort of divine deity or something, because you can test this. You can test placebos. You can test how much they work compared to, some sugar capsule or some, pill that's just water or some nonsense. And you realize that they actually fare no better than a placebo. And oftentimes they come to these situations with either a misdiagnosis from their doctor, or they think that they have some condition that's treated, and it turns out that they're actually not healed. They're not made better when you follow up with the doctor, or it's a placebo effect. Or in many cases, people are seeking medical treatment at the same time that they go to these faith healers.
Yeah.
But they don't share that information. And so they'll then say that they had a miracle and say that their cancer went away, but they don't tell every single person that they share this divine miracle to that they were also doing chemotherapy at the same time.
Yes.
So when I hear these stories, it's very easy to, as an atheist, to just dismiss a story like you're a liar. This isn't true. You didn't have a faith healing. And I'm like, no, I think that a lot of these stories that they have something there that they experienced, that they witnessed, that they, whatever it was, but there's just so many other possibilities of what may have happened that unless you follow up with their doctor, or you see their doctor before and after and verify that an actual healing took place beyond a shadow of a doubt, and you can replicate this at scale, and it only works for one religion and not another, and that it's not all of these gods that are, like, until you can do that and demonstrate that, you've got nothing. And so I tend to believe people that they have some sort of experience, but I say that everything that I have experienced and looked into and studied has led me to believe that there's not anything supernatural going on. But I'm open to changing my mind.
Well, I think that's the big question too, right? Like, these people have something that helps for some amount of time, for some issue, even if it's the emotional issue caused by the physical pain. And it is so multifaceted. There's so much that can contribute towards this healing, at least long enough for the cameras to be on, like you said. It's funny, my own experience, this is the last kind of Christian experience I can think of before my full deconversion happened. I was on a hike with my two best friends. They didn't know I was doubting at all. I was still like praying every day. I remember on this hike too, like we got to this beautiful part up in Glacier National Park, and I took some time to go pray on my knees by myself, like still very much in that mindset. But I had this injury from running, and I was very nervous. We'd spent all this time planning the hike and all this money getting there. And I was like, guys, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this hike. And I asked him at the beginning to pray and lay hands. So both my best friends since childhood are laying hands on my foot, on my heel. They're praying for me. And we start the hike, and I'm limping literally with like a 50-pound pack on for the first day. And the second day it's hurting less. And the third day, like, they're like, dude, you're not limping anymore. And what I hadn't remembered, literally, like, until years later, as I'm trying to like go through all of these supernatural events in my life and figure out like, well, then what was this? This is deconstruction, right? And I had gone to the doctor before, to like a urgent care before, and they're like, we don't know, man, like it could be this, maybe you'll need surgery, but let's give it some time. In the meantime, we're going to put you on a steroid. And I hadn't even thought about it. It was this pill I was taking for 6 days. And it usually starts kicking in around day 3 or 4, right when I started feeling better. But it wasn't kicking in when I had asked them to pray for me. And it was just something I was like, I had so convinced myself, and how much confirmation bias for them to be like, dude, we saw you limping. Now you have a 50-pound pack on going over mountains, and all of a sudden you're feeling better. And I just think, like, again, not to say for every single person that's ever been healed ever, there's that simple of a story. But knowing that was anecdotally the case for me, and knowing some other things that have happened since that I've been aware of that are, again, anecdotal and personal experience, there's zero reason, going back to Occam's razor, to just jump to this, oh, God's healing people, instead of some of the examples I gave and all the examples you just gave that are so much more likely or nuanced or multifaceted. So I'm really glad you shared some of that.
Well, and in that situation, we have, when we want to spread a particular narrative, we want to spread a particular story, and we're motivated to save souls and to convince people and have a powerful testimony, then there's a lot to be said for motivated reasoning. We have a selective attention. We have confirmation bias. We have ways that we focus on certain things and ignore other things. And so therefore it can only be this. Yeah.
It's what's frustrating though is trying to explain these multifaceted combinations, because again, you're right. It's probably not one thing. It's a combination of things most of the time that are giving whatever full result there seems to be, which by the way, in my particular case, just to follow up on the story, it just got worse again a few days after we got home as the steroid wears off, which all it does is bring down inflammation. Inflammation comes back up. I went to a PT, took 3 months to get this thing under control, and it was not divine, no miraculous healing. But in my head, it was like, oh, he fixed it when I needed it. I was able to do the hike with my friends. Like we had this bonding time. We were able to, you make all these excuses. But yeah, when a believer hears you trying to like deconstruct it and say it could have been this or this or this, they're like, look at you working so hard to clearly deny what is God. Because even if it was that steroid, Brandon, who made the plants that medicine came from, right? And so you still get this bombardment from a believer that's brain is not ready to accept that this isn't somehow connected to the belief they already have. And a lot of people, they have some personal experience that usually is revolving around prayer or healing that is like that thing they can't let go, because that feels so much more real than maybe I'm not understanding Exodus correctly. And maybe it was allegorical or metaphorical for this reason. And so it's those personal experiences as we talk about baptism in the Holy Spirit or water baptism or faith healings or prayer night that I think when you can help people understand what else could be probably most likely more than likely contributing to these things, it can be so powerful in helping people get over that final hump.
It can be, but I would go a step further and encourage people not to just look at, I have an explanation, therefore it's not this.
Sure.
Because there are plenty of cases where I have people, and this is outside the realm of faith healing. I've done videos on UFOs. I've done videos on things people mistake for ghosts or for demons or things like that. And oftentimes there's not just one or two or three things. There are usually dozens, if not hundreds, of explanations. So someone might come along and be like, well, I experienced something that I can only describe as demonic, and I saw this figure and I saw this thing, and what else could that be? And they'll kind of like put me on the spot of like, you have to perfectly explain this thing, and if you can't, therefore it's demons. And in actuality, like I can go through a list of just dozens of things that's like, okay, like, it could be sleep paralysis. It could be epilepsy. It could be pareidolia. It could be, you saw some eye floater in the corner of your eye. It could be that, you had this heightened sense of tension, and because, you had the power of suggestion because you went into a room that maybe had carbon monoxide in the room and you didn't realize that, you're smelling something that your body's having this reaction, this fear reaction to. Or it could be that there's a certain frequency, an audio frequency of sound that you don't hear, but your body still detects because it's a super low range frequency outside of our audible range. But it's a sound frequency that when you have things like earthquakes or volcanoes or things like that, usually that sound frequency travels through the atmosphere just like sound. And your bones can kind of detect, like inside your inner cheekbones and stuff, like you can kind of detect this frequency, and you have a weird adrenaline response to like, I need to get out of here. I'm in danger. And it's an evolutionary response. It's very normal as part of the natural world. But if you feel that and you're in a dark room and you can't explain why, you're in a basement, and it turns out that there's a fan and a vent that's causing this frequency to like make you feel paranoid, and maybe there's some mold spores that are causing you to have a particular hallucination. And there's so many things. I could literally go on for hours of things that people mistake for the supernatural, even if they're not on drugs, even if they're not drinking, even if they're not sleep deprived, even if they're well rested. There's just so many possible alternative, natural, normal explanations. And so just because you don't know what it was, or just because you don't have an explanation and you don't know what happened, does not mean that the next logical leap is, therefore, it's this specific demon and this specific religion and this specific book that was written thousands of years ago that just so happened to be in the room with me controlling my body. And it's or making me freak out or something. It's like, oh my God, there are a million different problems with the Bible, whether it's historical inaccuracies, scientific problems, internal inconsistencies, logical and moral failures. The list goes on and on and on. The fact that the book has been altered over time and it's been changed and there's mistranslations and it's not divinely inspired or divinely preserved. And the world is not 6,000 years old. And there was not a global flood. And this stuff is demonstrable and provable. So if you have a book that's clearly man-made, that, originated from the pagan roots of ancient Canaan, out of that backdrop, and has all the telltale signs all throughout the text of having these influences, that's written down by people that knew less about the world than your average 8th grader, and that is your holy book. That is where you're getting your knowledge of the universe. Before people knew about the germ theory of disease, a book where they literally thought epilepsy was caused by demons, and there's descriptions of Jesus casting out a demon from someone who's having a seizure and frothing at the mouth, and they think it's some spirit when we know what's going on when someone has a seizure. All of this stuff, I'm like, we know beyond a shadow of a doubt that this book is BS. And you're going to tell me that just because you don't know what happened when you got that weird feeling when you went into a dark room, therefore it was a demon. Right. Or you don't know what happened when all of a sudden, your great aunt, Gertrude, her glaucoma suddenly got better or something. It's like, I don't know. I can't tell you if it's some spontaneous remission, if it's something that the doctor is doing, what it was. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. I wasn't there. I don't know your aunt or your grandma or whoever. But I can tell you one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. It wasn't the God of the Bible. Whether or not there's some sort of spiritual something in the universe, that has yet to be demonstrated. But until it does, until someone actually comes along and shows, in every test that we've ever done, we've found absolutely nothing supernatural, whether it's been prayer studies. There's the Templeton Foundation did a massive study. It was a religious organization trying to look for the effects of prayer. There was nothing. Came up empty.
Actually got worse. There was a slight...
It got worse.
Yeah, for the people that knew they were being prayed for, most likely because of the stress that induced, they actually took longer to recover than the group that didn't know. Yeah, it's wild. And
you've got the James Randi Educational Foundation had $1 million prize for anyone who could demonstrate that they had supernatural abilities under proper scientific controls. And for over 50 years, countless people came forward. No one was able to demonstrate. And so to me, that tells me that until there is evidence, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And we owe it to ourselves to be skeptical so that we don't fall prey to BS like this. And the logical thing to do is to fall back on Occam's razor and the null hypothesis and the tools of reason and science and critical thinking.
Oh, you said it. I love it. I know you don't have a screen in front of you, so you can't see. I was actually just almost laughing and smiling as you kind of went on your diatribe, because I love the zeal. I love your, it's so frustrating. You hear about the one person's grandma and you're like, if this is the only thing keeping you in, like, here's everything wrong. There is a universe of issue that you are refusing to look at and holding on to this one thing that has, like you said, not one or two other explanations. Dozens, if not hundreds, of more likely and realistically proven explanations for this thing that you're going through that, by the way, happens to everyone else in every other religion under their belief that they associate incorrectly to what they were raised with. And I want to get into that with you too. But I'm going to try to hold our feet to the fire here and get back on track, although I love it. Going back to that person. Okay, so it's on, the plants have happened or they haven't happened. The people in the front row or that are exhibiting the signs of most suggestibility, they've gone up. But you're a normal, everyday person. You actually have this issue. It's your turn. The line has now ended. You're in front of this faith healer. From your research and knowledge, I want to talk about maybe what that person is feeling, of course, anecdotal and totally individualistic. But as the hands come on, as the words are spoken, as the music rises, as the chord progresses, what psychologically and scientifically is happening in this, or potentially happening in this person's brain?
From a personal experience standpoint, I've had hands laid on me countless times where people are praying over me and I want so desperately to be healed. And in one case, I was, long story short, I was breakdancing, I undercut a backflip and I broke a toe.
I'd love to see that video.
Unfortunately, I don't have a video of it, but maybe if you come to a conference sometime, I'll bust out some moves. But I broke a toe. My toe is literally cracked upwards and like pointing in an opposite direction. And there was this guy there he had claimed that he was a prophet and a faith healer and all of this stuff. And I was just like, oh my God, someone get Phil, someone get this guy to come pray over me. And I think that deep down inside, he knew that he was full of it. So he kind of took one look at it, realized like prayer isn't going to cut it because this isn't just someone's stomach ache or something. And he looked at it and he looked at me and he said, God is telling me that this time he wants you to learn a lesson.
Oh my gosh. I don't know what I was expecting, but I don't know if I was expecting that level of manipulation and getting out from it.
And so a bunch of other people gathered around and prayed over it, and nothing happened. And then the nurse came and just went, bop, like just cracked it back into place and put a splint on it and stuff. And I wound up going into the university doctor a couple days later, because I was actually at a retreat with there's an organization called Destino, which is the Hispanic version of Campus Crusade or Cru.
Sure.
And they were basically, a bunch of friends invited me to go, and so I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go, and just having fun. And then that happened, and the second time that I had a faith healing, I had a dislocation in my shoulder and had kind of torn some muscle tissue, and my shoulder was in pain, but I was like kind of getting around. I was doing okay and stuff. But there was a faith healer that was in town, and he was praying over different people, and everyone was telling me stories of how, he prayed over me and I had a stomach ache, and then suddenly I was just sitting there eating soup like my stomach was fine. I was like, wow, a miracle. People were saying different things. He went up to this girl on the street in the campus, and she had a leg brace on. And he prayed over her, and she took off her leg brace, and her pain was gone. She was healed. It's like, okay, like, again, kind of your stereotypical types of things that faith healers will go for. So we're all in this like worship service and stuff, and he's just done his talk and whatnot. And it was after the service had ended, so like a lot of people had gone home, but we were the few that were just like on fire, so excited, all gathering around to the front, wanting our prayer, wanting to connect and be close to Jesus. And it wasn't even necessarily about a healing. It was about just like, we're on fire for God and passionate about it. And so we rushed to the front. We're all, talking to him, and, here's this man of God, this faith healer prophet dude. And someone brought up the fact that, or I forget if either someone brought it up or if he asked if someone needed a healing, but I basically let them know that I had an issue with my shoulder. And so everyone gathered around me. They laid hands on me. They start praying over me. And I'm on the one hand, I do want to be at the time I was like, I want to be a good testimony to the works of God. I want to bring people to the faith. I want to demonstrate and have this story that I can tell. And at the same time, I wasn't just going to lie and say it was better if it wasn't. So they gathered around me, they laid hands on me, and I feel this pressure. I feel this expectation. I feel like all of these eyes are on me. There's also, it's kind of warm. You're surrounded by people in this tight little cluster. They're all touching you. You've got, oxytocin, you've got adrenaline, you've got cortisol from all of the stress the situation that you're in. You've got dopamine in your brain. There's this entire just cocktail of chemicals that's going on. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, they're praying over you. They're praying over you. They're praying over you. So how do you feel now? I don't know. It still hurts, right? Well, we just have to continue asking God, pray over him again. They're all, praying and praying in the name of Jesus and all this stuff. And you get this rush. You feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
Yeah.
You feel this kind of tingling sensation. And all of a sudden it's almost like this warmth going through your body. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm healed. It's incredible. Like, the pain is gone. It's gone. I'm healed. It's a miracle. So you're very quick to declare because you want there to be something. And you feel like the more eager you are, it's a demonstration of faith. It's a demonstration that you really believe. You're like, yes, I'm healed. I claim it. I name it. I claim it in the name of Jesus. And so everyone's like, hallelujah, praise God. And they're all like, oh my God. And stuff. And I actually got up and I was doing gymnastics at the time in college, and I stood up and I did a back handspring, it's like a backflip, but like you land backwards on your hands and then flip over. I undercut it just a little bit because like as my hand hit the ground, I felt a surge of pain shoot through my shoulder. So it's like on the one hand, I thought I was healed. I genuinely, fully, 100% believed that I had just received a faith healing. And then I did this back handspring. I made it over. I didn't break my toe that time. Landed it, but I knew something wasn't right. I knew that the pain was still there. I knew that it wasn't back to 100%, and I was confused. Because I was like, I'm not doing this for show. I'm not doing this, because I just want to get something out of God, like a divine vending machine. I genuinely just wanted to have a close connection and really feel the Holy Spirit and have this testimony that I could share with people. I didn't understand why it was still there. And so in that moment, it was kind of, I was in this position where I was just kind of went off to the side and I was just kind of pondering and praying and like asking God for a full healing. And I wasn't sure what was going on, but everyone was very quick to spread that story. And within about a week, there were people all throughout my Christian fraternity who were talking about the miracle that I had received.
Oh, wow.
And I felt conflicted because on the one hand, if I said something and I was like, actually, I wasn't healed, would that hurt their faith? Would that, potentially steer people away from the kingdom? Would my silence actually be better for the greater good for people's faith and belief?
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I felt conflicted because I was like, well, if I don't do anything, then it's just like, is inaction, is that wrong? Is that bad? I feel dishonest about it. So I feel like I should say something. I feel like I should set the record straight and let people know that I wasn't healed all the way. I wound up actually shortly after that leaving that fraternity, but I was still a Christian for years. I still pursued it with all my heart, with all my vigor, just trying to be closer to God. But I never forgot that experience.
So what did you chalk that up to for the remaining years of you being Christian, but with that experience?
I think I attributed it to like maybe my faith wasn't strong enough, or maybe God had a bigger plan or a bigger purpose that I just didn't understand. He works in mysterious ways, whatever it might be. I had already been kind of learning more about the brain and about neuroscience and about these different things. And so as I started to learn more about things that, like I was kind of hinting at earlier in this conversation, things that kind of people mistake for demons, I experienced sleep paralysis, thought it was something supernatural and evil. And then I learned the neuroscience behind it and what's actually going on, and that it's a very normal thing that happens to like a third of people. And we know what's happening in the brain. And as I started learning more and more about these things, then my belief in the supernatural really took a hit. I still believed that maybe there was a first cause or a creator or something, but it was definitely one of those tipping points where that was one of the dominoes that kind of led to me asking more questions. But that wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back or the thing. It caused me to kind of, I remembered it in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
And so then later, as I started having questions and doubts, then I was able to kind of understand and kind of put that in context. And it also allowed me to realize that a lot of other people who have these stories, or you hear these stories that people will exaggerate about faith healing second or third hand. And they're like, well, I saw this person whose shoulder was healed and I can't explain this miracle, so therefore it's God. When I would hear those types of stories, I always took them with a grain of salt because I knew from my experience
once that veil is gone in any capacity, it doesn't have to crumble your faith immediately, but it does become a measure for rethinking. And it's funny to think that there's probably someone still out there that's talking about your story. I saw a guy's shoulder get healed, and it's literally, here you are as this content creator that has spoken out against it, that has helped so many people do the opposite. And it's like this singular event is being talked about and used in both directions. And it does, once you see that enough, because I had the same thing. I would see things. I was the one at church. I was the one who saw this person that was overnight delivered from drugs, but I know their real story. I actually know that they relapsed a month later. And I know that, 3 months after that, they left the church because of an argument with leadership. And I know that, but someone else over here who doesn't have this inside track, they're still talking about this person that quit Coke overnight, and it's like, once you see that, it doesn't make you disbelieve in God, but enough of those stacked up and all of a sudden you lose your footing a little bit for a big part of maybe what was a catalyst for your belief in the first place. And I think it forces you to accept almost this different kind of Christianity where it's like, all right, people abuse this. This is sad, but my relationship is still real. My God is still real. Yeah. Like, oh, maybe there is a different way to read the book, but that's for me to still learn.
Or I encounter a lot of Christians that if you ask them why is it that they believe what they believe, they might point to one thing. They'll say, well, you can't just get something from nothing, and the universe appears to be so fine-tuned, or they'll talk about the watchmaker argument, or they'll talk about some experience that they had or something. And if you address each one of those individually, and one by one you go down the list and you show why this isn't true and why this isn't true and why this isn't true, even if they put forth all of the ammunition of reasons why they think they believe, oftentimes you can debunk every single one of them, and they know that each one of those is a bad argument, but they still feel like they have so many arguments. And so many bad, debunked, awful arguments does not make for good data. So I hear all the time people say, well, there's so much evidence for God. There's just so much. I've just seen and heard so much, and they can't necessarily recall all of it off the top of their head, but they've been so immersed in it. They've had so much indoctrination in it. They've heard so many bad arguments, but at the time they seem like good arguments to them. And even as they realize that each one kind of crumbles, they'll just shift to another one or shift to another one, and then ignore bits of evidence that contradicts all of it.
Yeah. It's a numbers game. They can't all be wrong. You don't have an explanation for everything. So yeah, you mentioned those 2 or 3 things. Yeah, you got me there. I'll have to rethink that. I'll look more into that. But yeah, there's this chunk, a very nondescript, very non-detailed, I should say, chunk of evidence that they've already processed previously and said this checks out. And yes, until and this is what's so fascinating to me is everyone's deconstruction or deconversion is so individualistic and different. And some people, it's one thing breaks them. And some people, they needed the 13th thing they thought were evidence to fail. And some people, it's the 103rd. And it is fascinating. But yeah, you're right. No one thing does much here. And that's why you can have a failed faith healing and still have believers.
I have yet to encounter an ex-Christian, ex-Muslim, ex-whatever, who became an atheist or agnostic, left their faith because they created a spreadsheet and added every single reason why they believe in God and slowly went one by one down the list and finally got to the bottom and realized that they were all bunk and were able to debunk every single one and then left the faith. It's just not how it works. Some people believe things simply because it makes them feel good. But there's a great quote by the magician and mentalist Banachek, who he said, when asked, why not just let people believe this when it makes them feel good? And he said, you can give heroin to a junkie and it'll make them feel good. It doesn't mean that it's good for them.
Yes, I love that. It is a very common question that I think anyone who makes counter-apologetic content gets is, why not? So what? Okay, you believe it's wrong, but like let people have their fairy tales, right? And there's so many different versions of that argument. But I think that is one of the best ways to come back at it is, if I thought that this was a net neutral or a net positive, I'm sure I wouldn't be doing as much work as I am doing. But I do think for most people, or at least potentially, which is something to consider as well, it errs a lot more on the side of a net negative, and that's something worth contending with. But let me bring you back. So there's things that are happening psychologically and on a chemical level in the brain when someone is having hands put on or music or the cadence of a pastor's voice. Something happens or something doesn't happen are our 2 options. And I want to talk briefly about both of those scenarios. So something does happen, whatever that might be. Walk us through what that might look like for an average believer who's getting this reinforcement to their belief.
So if you're told in the moment, you're up there on stage, you're told that God is giving you this healing, you believe it, and you genuinely feel better. First, I want to clarify that the placebo isn't necessarily short-term. Sometimes the placebo can have long-term effects. It's like I said before, it's not going to regrow a limb. It's not going to cause someone that has, this giant birthmark or this huge tumor to suddenly just fall off. But there are things that the placebo effect can have long-term effects on. So if you experience that in the moment, then the faith healer most likely is going to jump on it. They're going to pounce on it. Rather than take the mic away and move on to the next person, they are going to stand you up and parade you in front of the church. Like, hallelujah, we had, Jesus is here in the house tonight, which, that's going to add to your excitement. That's going to increase the chance that you have a rush of adrenaline, that you get up and run across the stage. But the faith healer, oftentimes they'll either lay their hands on you, have you fall over in the spirit into the arms of the catcher, and then you just lay there on the ground, basking in the presence of the Holy Spirit. And usually it's a highly emotional situation. Oftentimes people are crying either tears of joy or just like they've just gone through so much emotionally that they're just exhausted. They've had so much stress, so much buildup, and then there's just this pressure and this relief that like, I was in the spotlight, now I'm out of the spotlight. I just had this person lay their hands on me. I've been searching for a healing. I've been so desperate. I've had all of this hope and this anticipation. And now this moment, this grand crescendo just happened. It's just like this flood of emotions. And so oftentimes, sorry, my light just fell.
That's the devil trying to shut you up.
Yeah. Oftentimes, it's actually Steve in the corner bumped it. But yeah, if you're in this moment where there's just this grand crescendo and you're sitting there in this emotional state, just crying, like you get this flood of relief, and then the faith healer moves on to the next person, or they before they pray over you and have you fall down and get slain in the spirit, they'll have you run around and parade you in front of people, showing off that you're healed. And oftentimes down the road, what happens is the person will leave the situation thinking that they're healed, and they don't follow up with the doctor. They don't go back to actually see if they were cured. In the best case scenario, it's some chronic pain condition, and eventually the pain comes back and the person realizes that something's still going on, and either they keep coming and seeing a faith healer hoping for a permanent fix because they think that they got a miracle, and now they want a complete miracle because they got a partial miracle.
Yeah, that was in your video, and again, I'll link it in the description for everyone, but there is one person who comes back the next day. I assume it was like a multi-night evangelism effort. And he comes back and says, this time I want my complete healing. I felt better, but late last night, the pain came back. And it's almost a beautiful little display of his faith that he didn't just call this person out as a scam artist. He was like, you gave me a partial healing. My faith is great enough for the complete deal. Let's go all the way kind of a thing. And doing the work for this minister, by the way, but still wanting his healing. Yeah, it's so sad.
Yeah. And well, because they see this person as a man of God. And now that's the best case scenario for the person who is healed.
Yeah.
You know, either they have a long-term placebo effect and they actually do feel better from chronic pain, or, that they come back to the faith healer and keep coming, but like their life isn't at risk. Nothing happens to them. The worst case scenario is they don't call out and expose the faith healer because they genuinely believe that he's a real man of God. And if they don't get a faith healing, it's their fault. And so they develop crippling guilt. They feel like something's wrong with them. They feel like they must have the devil in their life. And so in one case, there was a girl who she felt so guilty that God wouldn't give her a miracle, that she just wasn't good enough and there was something wrong with her, that she literally, in a state of despair and depression and hopelessness, went and committed suicide. There's plenty of other cases where there was a expose of Benny Hinn that was done back in the early 90s, where he was telling people with HIV that they were cured. The investigative journalist sat down in an interview with Benny Hinn, and he asked him, he said, how do you know that these people have been cured of HIV? And Benny Hinn's like, well, the people tell me that they're cured. He holds Benny Hinn's feet to the fire and he says, Pastor Hinn, there's only one way to know if someone's been cured of HIV, and that's a blood test. Have you ever seen a blood test? And Benny Hinn tries to dodge the question, and he brings him back. He says, have you ever seen a blood test? And Benny Hinn says no. And the guy says, then if you don't know if this person is cured of AIDS and you're telling them that they're cured, you're not doing them any favors. You're not doing the person that they then hop into bed with the next night any favors. This person is now going around thinking that they don't have HIV. They could be having unprotected sex with someone and spreading it to other people and potentially causing other people to get HIV and AIDS and die. And Benny Hinn said he was going to do better. And literally the next service they followed up with him on, he was telling someone, you're cured of HIV. The demons of AIDS have just left you. He knows that he hasn't seen blood tests. He knows that some of these people that they then followed up with, and they found that they still had HIV.
Yeah, it's criminal.
And that's the harm that's caused.
Yeah. So there's two kinds of harm on both sides, and this is what I want to talk about. So we're talking about side one, the people that believe they get healed, whatever that looks like. And there's physical and there's emotional harm. The emotional harm you mentioned, of course, is the judgment, the shame, the guilt of why not me? Was my faith not good enough? What's wrong? What am I hiding? All the things there are already primed to give as the reason for when it doesn't work, so that there's not backlash. But then there's the physical harm, whether it's, someone stops taking their medication or they're spreading a disease. Why do you think, knowing and having had these exposés happen, even from secular organizations and Christian organizations, that these things are quote unquote still allowed? Like, is it just because of the protections of religion, like we see with other things where they're not held to the same standard of accountability?
There's a number of factors at play. The first is I can, from obviously I'm not a lawyer, but I can talk about legal cases that have, there was a landmark case where a faith healer named Jack Coe was arrested and tried for practicing medicine without a license in 1956. And he went to court, and the case was there was this boy with polio who was this small boy. I think he was like 4 years old or something, like very, very young child. And he was walking around with these braces on his legs. The pastor told him to take off his braces, to walk around without them. And it caused extensive damage to the boy's legs, several tens of thousands of dollars worth of damage. They took him to court. They had him arrested, and they tried to sue him for telling this boy that he was healed when he wasn't. And the boy continued to act in faith, his mother took basically, it doesn't just affect the people who are going and believe. Oftentimes it affects their children or their grandparents or other people. The boy's mother was the one that took this child into the faith healer and then had the boy walk without leg braces on. And so this poor little child is the victim of all of this. And they take the faith healer in, and he, at the time, was one of the largest it wasn't televangelists. This was before he had some early recordings, but this was before TV was really a tool that was used by these faith healers. But he was on the radio. He had a magazine subscription with a few 100,000 followers, and basically put this out to his following as religious persecution, that we are being targeted. They don't want us to spread the gospel. They don't want us to do what Jesus literally told us to do, to go and heal the sick and to spread the good news of Jesus Christ. And so they painted this guy, or he painted himself as a martyr. And he had this host of other faith healers around the country, because the publication that Jack Coe had, it was called the Herald of Healing magazine. There was another one, the Voices of Healing magazine. They both had massive reaches and massive audiences. They put out this petition for people to go and protest at the courthouse, and almost 1,000 people showed up to protest. And there were pastors that were giving their testimonies and talking about what a great guy this pastor was. They were all writing letters to the governor of Florida, where he was arrested, telling the governor to stand up for religious rights and to push back against this horrible thing. Even the sheriff who arrested him was like, well, he seems like a good Christian, upstanding man to me. And they basically got him off on a religious loophole.
Yep.
And that court cases set precedent. So when this guy continued to go and do his healings around the country, all of a sudden all these other faith healers were now emboldened to do the same. Now, going forward, faith healers around the country, some of them have been arrested, and they almost always get off on religious loopholes. And part of the reasoning is that if they genuinely believe what they're doing, and it's very, very difficult to prove that someone doesn't,
right?
And if the people coming to them are coming of their own volition and of their own accord and not being forced or coerced into it,
yeah,
and the people coming are, not being told to commit a crime, then you can tell them just about whatever you want. I could tell you right now that, the sky is made of milkshakes. Doesn't mean it's true, but I have the freedom to say a lie.
Yeah.
And so the pastors have the freedom to tell someone something that's BS. And if they believe it, and especially if they have religious protections for it, then what are you going to do?
Yeah, no, it's a great answer to it. I mean, it's a horrific answer, honestly. But yeah, you're very familiar with this situation. It is. And I run into this all the time when I see religious harm. I got a lot of questions and comments on that last video I did about the 2 toddlers with the baptism, because I was calling it child abuse. And I was talking about the psychological harms that come from that kind of an event. And people were like, well, would you advocate for the parents to lose, their children to CPS? And it's like, man, you want to be on the side of religious freedom. I am. You want to be on the side of free speech. Yeah. I am. But when there are certain things that aren't just spiritual, they're actionable, and they create actionable harm and outcomes. It is a really hard thing to learn where to draw that line. It's something I'm continuing to try to figure out myself of what I believe. Yeah. But if there was one place where I would feel really good about it, it would be faith healers on a large mass level that know for a fact that what they're doing doesn't work, and that these people are going to take the information and it will result in harm, at least for a percentage. Well,
a couple of things that can be done about it is, first off, I want to add to what I just said about how these past court cases have sort of set the stage for them to be able to continue doing this. But in addition to that, they get a tremendous amount of leeway just because they are so politically influential. And while you're technically not supposed to endorse any political candidates or make statements about policies and stuff, if you're a nonprofit or a church, you could potentially lose your tax exempt status. The IRS never goes after churches. It's just, for some reason, it's still seen as this bad look or this taboo thing, or people in the IRS are religious themselves and they're just like, I won't bother with it. But we should absolutely hold their feet to the fire. We should be demanding that these people be looked into. We should be demanding that the IRS looks into them and reviews their finances. Most of the cases where these faith healers have ended up going to jail, it's been because of tax evasion, because of exploitation, because of various financial scams. And so they've been looked into by the IRS or by various government agencies, and they've found plenty of other crimes to lock them up and put them away for. Until we start taxing churches, until we make it so that they have to publish their finances so that, that they're not opaque. Right now, they function as not just like 501c3s where like typical nonprofits have to show their finances, show where their money's being spent. Churches don't have to do that.
Isn't that crazy?
They have they're in an entirely different category where their books are completely opaque. And I think we're past the point where, you'd have to be incredibly gullible to think, or incredibly naive to think that churches will just, self-police themselves and just hold themselves accountable. Most of these organizations.
How many stories do you need? Yeah.
Most of these organizations, these huge televangelists and faith healers, most of them, they sit on their own board, or their board members consist of like their wife, their brother-in-law, and like their sister or something.
And the pastor down the street that's doing the same thing that he's on the board of too. Yeah.
So there's no scrutiny. There's no oversight. They just do whatever they want. It's just wild.
It is crazy. And of course, abuse is going to happen. This is the thing. Here's where I still want to go with you, keeping this in mind. But one of the things I was going to ask you at the end is, what should we be doing about it? Which you answered a little bit, and I want to get back to that. But then specifically, what should Christians who disagree with this practice do about it? And we'll get to that. But it is this acceptance from believers of it's going to be abused. It doesn't mean God's wrong. It doesn't mean we're wrong. It doesn't mean the Bible's wrong. It means we live in a fallen world. It means Satan has a grasp on, people's hearts. And of course, like this stuff is going to happen. It happens everywhere, and including the church. And they just immediately, to my mind, erase what I believe they are helping prop up with their not as extreme version of. And I really want to hear your thoughts on that, but I want to save that for the end. So let me pull you back to, that's the psychological and physical harm of the person that thinks it went well. What about the person that is not healed? Whatever the reaction is in the moment, maybe they kind of nod along with the pastor, or maybe they say something and the pastor moves on and shifts the attention, but their moment has ended. They know they're not healed. What are the psychological and obviously physical issues for them?
There's a feeling, especially when there's pressure on you, when there's people around you, when there's people watching you, looking for, hoping for a miracle and it doesn't come through. There's a certain level of expectation among a lot of Christians that that's kind of the default, because a lot of people have prayed for stuff and not gotten the answer. But there's also when you're seeing a faith healer go from person to person to person, and he's healing everyone, but then he comes to you and you're not healed, or you're honest about the fact that your pain didn't go away, then you do feel kind of guilty that the pressure is put on you, as if there's something wrong with you, as if you have a personal sin in your life, or there's something that you didn't have enough faith. And so I personally felt kind of let down, frustrated, like I'd been overlooked, like something was wrong. I was confused. I didn't know what to make of it. And in that type of a situation, you go home, but oftentimes it can be very emotionally damaging. It can be very psychologically distressing, because you're second guessing what faith even means. And I knew that I had faith. I knew that I believed. I wouldn't have been there if I didn't. And yet, despite being raised and immersed in this environment and so heavily indoctrinated that it was all I knew, like I didn't even know how to doubt in a way. It was just like, this is the truth. This is, no matter what, this is what I believe. And I'm going to live it out. I'm going to act it out. I'm going to put my faith into action. And it still didn't work. There's something off.
I'm sure it's already enough the games your own mind plays on you, right? Because you want to make excuses for this God too. The first instinct for a believer isn't to say, oh, I didn't get healed, then God's not real. It's anything but that, I would imagine, for most people. And so you're already trying to come up with all the reasons this could have happened. And unfortunately, it probably points to you most of the time. But then I know on top of that, the pastor, the preachers, whether it was before the event or after the event or during, say something to the effect of, there is a spirit of fear in here that's going to hold people back tonight. Or, the devil is working on some of you to prevent you from the goodness that God wants. And so they prime your brain to already make you the problem. Remembering to your video, there's this shot, almost embarrassing, I think might be the feeling. There's this woman getting up off the ground after clearly having, been slain in the spirit. And she gets up off the ground and is looking around, and the attention is moved off of her. There's no one around, and she obviously still seems hurt to some degree. She's kind of hobbling off, and then you see people just walking down the hall to leave the church. And it kind of paints this scene to me of like how lonely, for a second there they had the spotlight. For a second there they had the pastor's attention and thus God's attention. And now they're just picking themselves up by their own might, with their own pain still, walking back to their car, to their normal life, like it's over. And I just have to imagine that letdown is so drastic in people with less faith, or that were barely hanging on. Their pain is more severe, more chronic. It's a disease that's going to kill them in a certain amount of months or years. I just can't imagine the psychological damage that does to people.
It's such an emotional roller coaster. There's ups and downs. It's like a seesaw of, you come in and you've got this expectation and this hope, and there's the person's staring at you, they're laying hands on you, and then you come crashing back down when all of a sudden nothing works. It doesn't pan out. And a great example of this, though, is there's this case where this couple brought their son who's dying of terminal cancer to Benny Hinn. And it's one of the few cases where Benny Hinn actually allowed someone up on stage who was just in a wheelchair, completely non-mobile, not able to react, not able to move, to pray over them. And of course, nothing happened. Benny Hinn prays over the boy, and he does it sort of to basically play to this documentary filmmaker that was trying to do this video about Benny Hinn, and prays over this child. The child doesn't get up, nothing happens, and he says, just keep trusting God, don't be discouraged, and God's going to heal you, poor boy. And this family goes home, and like good Christians, they literally say that nothing happened to their son, but they're not discouraged. And they decided to pledge another $500 to Benny Hinn's ministry, because they think that that's what it takes, that Benny Hinn has told them that they have to plant a seed of faith and continue believing and trust God for a healing. So they continue. It's not a rich family. It's not a wealthy family by any stretch. And yet they're giving money that they don't have out of desperation to this person in order to hopefully get a healing for their son. And within a couple months, their son passed away from cancer. And they continued to believe in Benny Hinn and continued giving money to his ministry. And it's just heartbreaking to see that kind of a thing happen. And at that point, you have invested so much in the ministry. It's very hard to admit that you've thrown away money, that you've thrown away time, that you've taken someone that now is gone to a faith healer and it didn't work. And so it's like the sunk cost fallacy. A lot of people, when they go to gamble, they might lose $500 at a slot machine, and they're like, but the next one I'm going to get it, the next one I'm going to get it. And they might lose 500 more, and they'll throw good money after bad because they're like, well, I've already spent so much time and so much money and so much effort. Like, I have to keep going now. Oftentimes people keep going to faith healers again and again and again. They're like, but I'm so invested. I've done so much, and I've spent so much of my life, so much of my time, so much of my energy. There's such a strong cost. And yet the more that people have invested into it, the harder it is to admit that you've been duped.
That's a great point, that sunk cost fallacy, because it's not just have I been to a faith healing event or not before and how many times. It's all the times anyone's ever prayed for you. It's all the times you had a quiet time and had that special prayer to God. It's the total amalgamation of all your spiritual life up until that moment that is essentially kind of hanging out there in a very vulnerable state with this litmus test almost of a yes or no. And you can't let it be that binary. You can't let it mean no or failure, at least on God's part. And so, yes, of course, it turns in and it makes things horrific for yourself. I think that's got to happen to so many people. And it's got to be one of the biggest tragedies and the most harm is it's me. I'm broken, which is already the state that these people are told that they are. The reason that you have the illness is because sin is in the world, because of the fall, because of our sinful nature, because you are deserving of hell and nothing better, yet be for the grace of God. And so it all does work together in reinforcing itself, no matter the outcome.
Yeah. It's so sad to see people continue on in something like this when it does have a cost. And oftentimes the cost of embarrassment or the cost of realization, the painful realization that you have been living a lie and chasing after a lie, oftentimes is too hard for people to admit. And so they'll continue on with their eyes closed just because it's like, I can't deal with a world where I will have wasted my entire life chasing after something that's not true.
Yeah.
And I would, if anyone is in that situation that's listening now, I would really like to encourage them that you don't have to. It can get better. And don't throw away the rest of your life. Right now, what's in the past, that's over. You are you right now. All you have right now is this present moment and whatever future life you may or may not have. Don't throw that away. Don't toss that away too. Don't lose the little bit that you have left. Don't lose the time that you have left. Don't lose this moment that you have by chasing after something that has already cost so much. Take it back, seize it back, reclaim it. This is your moment. This is your time. This is your future. There is hope. It can get better.
I couldn't agree more. I'm really glad you said it. I almost want to end there because it is really the end all be all message that we want, is that yes, maybe time has been robbed of you so far in your belief system. And yes, maybe you've missed out on opportunities to be or do other things had your life be different, but you can't control that. All you can control is going forward, and to let this incorrect or false thing continue to control you or the narrative for the rest of your life would be the greatest harm of them all.
Well, imagine if someone scammed you out of $500,000 and you're just like, I cannot cope with the pain of realizing that I've been scammed, so I'm going to give them the rest of the keys to my house and my car and everything too. It's like, no, it's not sensical, but oftentimes we see people do that when it comes to belief.
Yeah. Second to last thing that I want to press you on or get your opinion on here. One of the things that opened up my eyes so big during my deconstruction is we're told for so long how special Christianity is, that we have it right, everyone else got it wrong. And it can be such to the degree that the individual believer, speaking for myself, can believe I'm the only one, or Christians are the only ones capable of having these intense feelings, these healings, the burning in the bosom, etc. And you downplay, whether you mean it or not, the rest of humanity and what they're experiencing, feeling, and able to go through. And so relying that to this topic, I'm curious if you can share with us other cultures and other religions. Do they have this same kind of thing, faith healings? Do they have the same kind of psychosomatic reactions and responses, or their own version of how they put it forth? Because I'm hoping that if people can see it elsewhere as a factor of human psychology, that it takes some of the sting out of, well, maybe that's what's showing Christianity to be true or special, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, none of this is unique to Christianity. They might call it one thing, they might call it something different, but you can see this all throughout human cultures. You can see, even within Islam, there's faith healers, there's faith healing pastors. There's an entire sect of Islam called the Sufis that oftentimes practice mystical dances and chants and rituals. You see in Eastern mysticism, there's like Kundalini rising. You'll see people speaking in tongues in Eastern mystical settings, sometimes under the influence of drugs, sometimes not. When I was Christian, I would have pointed to it and been like, well, that's of the devil, that's demonic, that's whatever. But when you realize that this is a very ubiquitous experience that's all throughout human cultures, there's tribes in Africa that have similar faith healing rituals. There's Native American rituals for healing and stuff. When you start to see that this is a ubiquitous thing, because we all share the same neuroscience, we share the same chemical pathways in our brains and the same basic psychological makeup with slight differences to upbringing and nurture. But when you see how closely related all of humanity is, it makes sense that we would all have the capacity to have similar experiences. And that's exactly what we see. That's exactly what we find. So if the hypothesis that this is a natural thing that occurs naturally, there's pathways for in the human brain, and the other hypothesis is that it's unique to this one religion, well, what we see is all of the data supports the former hypothesis. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity is completely wrong and that these aren't all demonic and that this is all, of God. But the fact that every single other culture, oftentimes, I don't want to make a blanket statement because there's a ton of cultures with different ideas, but when you see a lot of them making the same claims about Christianity, that it's some evil spirit and that theirs is the right one or something, then that tells me something about what's really going on.
Yeah, I'm glad to have your level of expertise to be able to bring that forward, because I think that's got to be, at least again to me, it was one of the most powerful things, was waking up and realizing I'm not special. This religion's not special. This holy book's not special. They all fall prey to the same arguments and issues. And so if I'm not going to believe it for Islam or Hinduism or the Native American tribes, why am I special pleading myself? Why am I the exception?
And even outside of religious settings. So if you were to encounter the pushback from Christians that say, well, those are demonic. What about situations that are entirely a-religious, like not from another religion, but you go to a concert where you have, Justin Bieber playing and people are just absolutely going ecstatic, hysterical, losing their mind. The music's drumming up all of this excitement and people are just having this near spiritual experience. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who used to be religious that thought that they were experiencing the Holy Spirit, and they're describing it exactly like how all the other Christians that I've talked to who are still Christians would describe an encounter with the Holy Ghost. They say, that's what I experienced when I was in church. And then they're like, and then I went to my first concert and experienced the exact same thing. The goosebumps, the warmth running down the back of my neck, the excitement, the tingling, the sensations of, sweaty palms and just like emotional fervor and dancing about and almost in this hypnotic like state and stuff. And they're describing this situation that it's like we all have the capacity to experience. It's just a neurochemical experience. There's nothing supernatural about it. But if you don't know that, then it's very easy to attribute it to the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And when you've been conditioned to believe, because every time you've ever had a special feeling, there was some authority figure spiritually there saying, that's God, that's the presence of the Lord, that's the Holy Ghost. Like, of course, that's all connected. The concerts is a great example. I know you also gave the example of like sporting events in your video, and I thought that was so apt. And, one of the biggest like little corners of YouTube is the ASMR community, which I think is a hilarious way to see how easy it is to even self-induce this. They talk about getting triggers, but you're having the same kind of response, the goosebumps, the neck tingling, the feeling of specialness. And that's why there's even like personal, what do they call it? They call it like, personal attention ASMR, where just by someone talking to you, looking at you seemingly, even this fake experience via online, it can arouse these feelings. Of course it can when there's 100 other people and a pastor with prestige looking at you. Like it really does just go to show how simple the effect is, and hopefully take some of the sting out of it or the power out of it for people that have attributed it incorrectly.
I'm not going to encourage any of your audience to try any illicit substances, but when I was in Canada, there was a place that had legal psilocybin. I got to try mushrooms for the first time during the solar eclipse that happened recently. And to anyone who thinks that this is not neurochemical, the chemicals that your brain releases thanks to these mushrooms is literally just this plant growing out of the ground, this fungus. Nothing spiritual about it, nothing supernatural about it, nothing, demonic about it. You're eating a mushroom. The most intense spiritual experience I've ever had in my life was after doing mushrooms during a total solar eclipse.
There's a wonderful book that I'd encourage anyone, same thing, don't go do a substance on anyone's regard, but there's a book called How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, where he goes through the 7 main forms of psychotropics, psilocybin, working all the way up to whatever is on the back of those poison dart frogs in South America. And he talks about it from a scientific, psychological, and perceived spiritual effect through each of these 7 drugs and what is happening in the brain. And it's fascinating. But yes, that is probably the best example is psilocybin or some kind of psychotropic for mimicking what people have attributed, and we could get into.
Oh, it didn't even mimic. It went above and beyond, far above and beyond any supernatural experience.
I can only imagine. Good Lord, during the eclipse too. Yeah. What a trip. But here's my last question for you, and then I'll let you go. I appreciate your time so much. There are going to be non-believers who hear this and they're like, yes, that's obviously all ridiculous and it's going to be harmful, but what can I do? And then I would hope that there's a group of believers, specifically Christians who are watching this, that would say, well, I don't agree with that. I do see the harm. I do see that it is an abuse. But those are people who have let the devil get in the way, or those are people who are twisting scripture for their own means. Like, I'm not responsible for them. And so to both groups, my question to you is, what can or should they be doing?
I would strongly encourage Christians to call out this stuff. It doesn't make you less of a Christian. It doesn't make you, a bad Christian. As an atheist, I was very, very much reaching a point where I was depressingly starting to think that every single Christian was just dishonest and wasn't willing to call stuff out and was just, I'd lost a lot of respect for Christians the more I was diving into this stuff. And then I found some channels by Christians who were calling this out. People like Justin Peters, groups like the Trinity Foundation and others.
Even Mike Winger just did his big Benny Hinn thing. Wasn't it
expose?
Benny Hinn? Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And Mike Winger, I disagree with on just about everything. And yet the fact that he was willing to shine a spotlight on it and call it out, I think if Christians want to retain any semblance of credibility, like that's what you need to do, is call out this stuff, call out this nonsense. Don't fake it in order for your testimony to reach more people. If anything, dishonesty, it's one, if God is real, he sees that. And he sees the lies that you're using. And I don't think that you need lies in order to spread the truth. The truth can stand on its own merits. Truth withstands scrutiny, just go where the truth leads. If you don't have a miracle, just say, it didn't happen. That's fine. Don't shame people for not receiving a miracle. Don't blame them. Don't try to assume or judge people for not having a healing. And if you have a healing or you don't have a healing, if you don't have a healing, that's okay. If you think that you have one, maybe look into it a little bit deeper. Go get checked out by a doctor, because if you think that you have a healing and you have a condition that is potentially terminal that medical science could heal, it would be such a waste to throw away your life by not getting the treatment that you need. If you go and you get tested and it shows that you actually were healed of something, then what a great testimony that would be. You could literally point to it and be like, look, I was healed. Went to the doctor and I got these test results. That's amazing. But don't stop seeking medical help just because you think that, Billy Burke or Todd White or someone suddenly somehow miraculously healed you. No, get it checked, get it verified, test it. And if you see a faith healer that's doing this stuff that, is practicing all these nefarious things, call it out, expose it. Don't let it get swept under the rug.
Yeah. And it's not just the Christian's responsibility to, call this stuff out. I think wherever there's harm and there's the potential for harm reduction, it kind of puts all of us in the hot seat. So for an atheist who is just becoming aware of this kind of thing, they've not been from our experiences in the past where they can say, oh, look at this. This is so harmful. I've seen it firsthand, but they're starting to get a glimpse. What can they be doing?
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I was saying about, write to your congressman and push for
Still
change
for
and lobby
Yep.
for change and stuff like that, that all still applies.
Yeah.
Call it out, point it out. If you see someone that's going to one of these people, share my videos with them, tell them, not just my videos, there's been exposés that have been done by everyone from Fox News to CNN. This isn't a political partisan issue. This is a matter of truth. This is a matter of right and wrong. And so call it out, expose it, share this stuff, tell people, let them know, save them, that you could save someone's life, literally. You can safeguard them against this stuff. And for the Christians who might otherwise be considering donating to one of these people, stop giving them your money.
Yeah.
They don't need it. They're wasting it in these $10,000 a night hotel suites. They're blowing it left and right on vacations and cruises and yachts and private planes. They don't need your money. No matter what they tell you, it is not going to save souls. It is going to line the bank accounts of these filthy rich scum buckets.
And there's so much better that people could be doing with their money,
There are so many better causes. I'm not saying don't tithe or don't give to your local church, your small community and that's trying to come together and stuff. I understand that every organization has bills to pay, but stop giving it to these giant mega pastors and these televangelists. They don't need it. I promise you. So the less people keep funding them, the better.
No, it's good advice. And I will list here in the description is many of Thomas's videos, as well as a lot of the exposés that we've referenced and that I can collect. So if you're looking for a resource center, it will be in the description down below. But man, first of all, just amazing to have met you and got to spend some time with you and hear your passion. And I'm really appreciative of your time and your expertise. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. And if there's one more link I would recommend you put down below is the Trinity Foundation. Like I said, it's a Christian organization, and I'm saying this as an atheist. They do great work. They call out and expose this stuff. They have a victims hotline. So if anyone wants to call in and talk to them and share their story, if anyone has information on faith healers who they have maybe worked with or been behind the scenes and has information that they want to come forward and expose, you can either write to me, thomas@holykoolaid.com. I would love to hear more stories and get more information. I'm actually working on a documentary, but also the Trinity Foundation. They have a phone line you can get in contact with them, and I know that they've done excellent work over the years, and they're more than willing to work with you, or not just if you're a Christian, if you're an atheist too, because they've worked with me.
So. Awesome. I'll add that, and I'm glad to be able to know that and help plug that. So thank you so much for that. But yeah, wonderful to have you here, and I'm sure we'll work together hopefully more in the future. So until then.
Absolutely. I'd like that.
All right. Thanks for being here. Have a great day. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support, my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, GVI, Jacob, Jason, Joe, Kitboga, Perry, Rocket, Sean, and Strong Rex, my Humanist heroes, Imposter, James, Jared, and Christy, my Atheist advocates, Caleb, Jeff, Jeffrey, Mrs. Webb, Paul, Sparky, and Todd, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of the channel or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people today.